Aloha, I'm Reverend Tim Lytle, Senior Minister here at Unity Church of Hawaii in Honolulu. And we are so grateful for all of you who watch us on our YouTube channel. We know with you that as you view these teachings and apply them to your lives, that it helps to build your life into the very best one that can be imagined. If you're ever in the area, please come and join us for a service, and please enjoy the message that you're about to watch. Aloha.
And you know what? I want you to give yourselves a round of applause for coming out today, showing up to this community, supporting the community in ways that you do. It can be felt. It can be heartfelt. So I really want to just acknowledge that. And for anybody who's visiting here, this is your first time here in this community, know that we are growing through some things right now. And we're growing through change. And I didn't say going through something, I said growing. Because that's what absolutely, that's what we're being called to do, is to grow. That this is what we're here to do. And sometimes, that feeling, growing pains. I think there was actually a television sitcom show that I used to watch as a child, but it talks about that. And sometimes when growth happens quickly, it's quite painful. I had a friend who, I guess, spouted, 6 inches in a year, but their bones were always aching, but, was a wonderful basketball player in high school. But sometimes those things are necessary in order to really get to what was supposed to mature out of things. And so, yes, we're growing through some things today. And the title of my talk was very purposeful because it speaks to those things that are seen or known but not talked about. And so if you notice behind me, there is an elephant in the sanctuary, a nice little small elephant, but yeah, right in the center there. But you've heard the saying, elephant in the room. And so those are the things that everybody knows about but just doesn't want to talk about. And so I called this the elephant in the sanctuary because I thought it was most appropriate to first stop looking out there and saying the sanctuary or the church or the community or the United States or whatever, and start looking at this inner sanctuary, that all work begins within us. That's where it starts. You can't do anything out there. Nothing out there actually needs to change. There has to be this inner transformation that is felt in order for long-lasting change to take place. And maybe it's our culture that we don't feel empowered enough to really look within or to look at those elephants, those things that we know are there, but we just don't want to speak about. But guess what? Other people see our elephants. And they do. I mean, really, they do see our elephants. And that's the catch, is that the elephant that we need to address is actually within us. And it can never be handled properly externally until it is dealt with internally. And that's our main focus here today. Not to change anything outside, only inward. And when Reverend Tim was speaking of those shadows, he really gave a powerful message of these things that we cast on and these things that need healing within us, or that really are demanding healing at this point. If we're to continue on this path in this spiritual community, as co-creators together, we're going to have to do some work, some internal work. And it doesn't always feel good. I promise you, it's sometimes it can be quite painful. But you know what? I've come to realize that most of us here, most of us that are serving this community, that show up here to worship together, to pray together, to celebrate together, and to mourn together, are very passionate about this community. There's overwhelming evidence that we're very passionate about this community. I've seen it for several weeks we've shown up and we showed how much we care about what's happening within the very fabric of this community. But we also need to realize that just because we're passionate about something, it can also be a bit destructive when we don't know how to focus that energy in productive ways. sometimes we call passion, we look out there and we try to fix something that might not necessarily needed to be fixed, or we try to correct somebody that maybe did not ask us for our 2 cents. But we feel obliged because we're passionate about a purpose to do something about it. And so once upon a time, I was very passionate about something. But I had some huge elephants that I needed to address. So many of you know that I was an anti-terrorism officer working for the Department of Defense way back when, long time ago, well, 7 years ago. And so I want to give you a little bit of background. So I was this passionate 32-year-old, maybe 31, 32-year-old female in a male-dominated career field. I always felt like I had to prove something. I would study the regulations on the weekends. I would show up to work early. Well, no, cancel. I would show up to work on time, if not a little bit late, but stay later. That's what I did. I'm so used to saying to show up early. It wasn't true. So I stayed a bit later than I probably should have. I worked on the weekends. I was dedicated. And my main mission was to write policy and procedures and then drill communities on them, on terrorism, on natural disasters, and stuff like that. And so I had one other thing I have to mention is I made a promise to myself when I got hired that there was this award that yearly an anti-terrorism officer would get, Anti-Terrorism Officer of the Year. And I said, you know what, Johanna? I'm going to get that award. So I started out making this promise to myself in this male-dominated career field. And so I set out with that in mind. And so I was making all these policies and procedures for these communities. And there was one particular community that whenever I visited, it just seemed like the individuals there were kind of lax, just laid back, didn't take safety seriously, but I was very passionate about safety and security and making sure everybody was safe and secure. But they did not have the same passions as I did. And so I wanted to provide one of the biggest exercises that they had actually seen in over a decade. So it took about 6 months to plan. But the first 3 months, I had enlisted, let me see if I have, there we go. Oh, so there we go. Once upon a time, there is me upset right there. But so I had enlisted all of these agencies, from the German national agencies to U.S. forces. So some of these, the SEK, they're commandos. These are people that are detailed to work with dignitaries and to do any type of hostage situations. They're the ones that you would call if you have a VIP in that particular state to really protect them. And so I began to forge relationships with them. And the DRK or the Deutsches Rotes Kreuz is just the German Red Cross. But I was building bridges with them. And then the Bundeswehr, and then the fire department as well. So I had these military forces, I had some combat forces, all these people working with me, and also working in combination with the Department of Defense, with the school systems there, and also the military and the provost marshal. So 3 months I'm working with these individuals. We're meeting every Thursday, and I noticed that the crowd is starting to become starting to thin out a bit. And I didn't know what was happening. I was like, okay, when this began a couple of months ago, I had everybody was bought in for this, but I had no idea what was going on. Well, one day I had to miss a meeting, and the operations director stood in and facilitated in my place. So that was a Thursday. On Friday, he called me into the office. He says, Miss Kelly, can I speak to you for a minute? I'm like, okay. So I went into his office. And he says, well, how do you think this exercise planning is going for this one community that you want to serve? And I said, I think it's going well. But, there was something within me that knew better. It had seen some fruits that were happening. By their fruits shall you know what type of plant they are, a tree. So I was going around calling myself an orange tree, but I was producing apples. So I'm really an apple tree. And I was producing, I want to say this in what better words? Yeah, I was producing this state of where disharmony. People did not want to work with me. And so he, for the next 15 minutes, began to tell me that people were dissatisfied with my leadership, that, and went to go on through examples. And then I said to him, he says, you know what? And there's this elephant in the room. And I said, what elephant? He says, well, it's you. I said, well, why doesn't anybody tell me these things? He says, because, he says, they compare you to the female version of Idi Amin. And if you don't know who Idi Amin is, I had no idea. So as soon as he said, I had no idea who this gentleman was. I went home that day and I looked up that name, and then I saw this movie, The Last King of Scotland, and I was mortified. And I had to start doing some reflection. There was something happening. My team was falling apart. There was lots of money in this, invested in this exercise to protect this installation, this community. And because I was not leading people properly, because I had acted like a dictator instead of like a teammate, it was starting to fall apart. And people were not happy. So I had to be honest with myself. That's the first thing, is when you look at these elephants inside, remember, by the fruits, what are you producing? I was producing basically people not wanting to work with me, no team spirit, nothing was happening for me in that regard. And so I started to look, and I realized that there were a lot of insecurities that I was holding on to. I was overcompensating being a female in this male-dominated society. I had commandos that didn't even want to work with me. That's how bad it was. When you have people who are ready and willing to, jump out of airplanes and protect presidents, don't even want to work with you, there's something wrong with that. And so I had to really do some soul searching, this coming to Jesus moment for myself. And I realized that I was off my mission. I had no idea what my mission was. And so I started to really take a look. Well, what was my mission? Well, yeah, it was to conduct exercise, but really what was it to do? It was to ensure that people had the protective measures in place to protect themselves. And I was exercising those, and I was kind of grading them versus their plans and capabilities. I was there ultimately to serve people. But unfortunately, because I had this illusion of grandeur, that I wanted to be the anti-terrorism officer of the year and the best one out there, and I'm a girl power and everything else, I had put that aside, my real mission, and focused on something that was, just really self-centered. So I had to be honest with myself. I had to look at, I was not the best type of leader at this point. But it really took the operations director, because it would have probably continued on until we had to go through this exercise. It took that operations director a lot of courage just to address me in that. And I realized now that I was actually starting to apply, once I realized what was going on, I started to apply some spiritual principles. So I started to think about this, that my teammates and I were one. We were of one, we had one mission. It was the same. So we should be stepping in one accord. And that my thoughts, I can change my thoughts about them. Why was I thinking that this community, just because they had, they were easygoing, did I have some judgment against them? I had to drop that judgment and treat them fairly. And so the moment my mind changed about them, everything started to change. And I started to thinking, you know what? We can be a team. I can. There's something within me that is a great leader. I've done it before, and I've just forgotten how. And so I came to work on Monday. I sent an email to everyone, and I actually apologized. And I gave some positive words in hopes that on Thursday I would see everyone there at the meeting. Well, surprise, everyone did come to the meeting. It was a full house again. And I started to listen instead of speaking all the time. There's a saying, be quick to listen and slow to speak. And so I was taking ideas down. And now I was willing to work together with everyone. But hadn't somebody said something to me, this would not have been so. Now, in the end, these individuals are still great friends of mine. They support me. The SEK individuals, they are just wonderful supporters. I still talk to them this day. But you know what? There was a time when even the commandos didn't want to speak with me. But there was me. It took somebody to point out an elephant to me and then me to change my mind and be willing to be honest with myself in order to produce some results that I truly wanted to have manifest in my life. Now, like I said, you can identify, if you're looking at what is it in my life that I can really release and let go? What is no longer serving me? Well, look around. How are you having your movement in being with individuals? Are you producing cohesiveness or division? Are you supportive or are you reactive? These are things that we just, as leaders, as workers, as caregivers, looking to see how we're showing up and are we being the most loving to one another in this process. Trust me, working together as a team produces far better results than division. But you have to know what your mission is as well if you're working in a team. Okay, and then let's take it back to this community. Principle. We have guiding principles. Now, I used to hear that principles, these are the ways that we live by and rules to how this community functions. But really, when I started to look at principles, it's ideals and truths for our lives that we are unwilling to compromise. These are things that are true under all conditions for us, that we will not sway to the left or to the right when it comes to upholding them. Start to look at what type of principles, your individual principles that you're holding for yourself. Are you accountable for your actions? Or do you place blame on others when things don't go right? Start to look at these inner principles within you, and those are your guiding forces. What are the things that you will not break no matter what is happening? So in these unity principles, God is, I am, think it, pray it, do it, or be it. These are foundations that we know that we are connected, that God is and I am, that there's this oneness about that. And then the think it, that our thoughts are powerful, the law of mind action, that what we think comes into fruition, that if we entertain thoughts enough, thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. And then pray, meditate. That was the founding, what our co-founder, Myrtle Fillmore, she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. And then through prayer meditation, within 2 years, she was able to heal that. And at the time, that was a death sentence. But doing these things on a day-to-day basis, the action, the last part, action is necessary. You have to do these things. You have to put them into practice. I can read 100 books about how to show up loving. But until I am love in action, it means nothing. So does anyone know here what our mission is? Anyone? All right. Now, would you say our mission is, Reverend Lever, you're not allowed to answer. Okay. Yeah, everybody but Reverend Levitt. Okay. Okay, so how many people think our mission is centered in God? We elevate global consciousness through the realization of oneness. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like a good mission? Yeah. Okay, well, that's our vision. Okay, our mission is actually different. Our mission is Unity Church of Hawaii fosters personal transformation, creative relationships, and compassionate, sacred service. So we foster growth, individual growth, and then once the individual changes, the group dynamics change as well. Creative relationships, we're working together, teamwork, creating the future today. And then compassionate, sacred service. We show up in selfless, loving service for this community. Not with our will be done, but God's will for this community to be done. And so, taking away anything and everything of what's happening here, right now, start to look within yourself. How are you showing up? Are there some things that could probably be healed within? Maybe it's a poor self-concept or the belief in lack. Whatever that is, realize that other people are affected by it as well. So heal it within first before you start to point the finger out there about what's happening with your brother or with your sister. Chances are, we have a saying here, if you see it, you got it. Then there's something within you as well that needs to heal. And so as we go through the remainder of this day, the Super Bowl Sunday, thank you, let us start to tap within. Start to figure out these things, these shadows, these elephants that people know about but just don't tell us about. Yeah, there's elephants here in the sanctuary as well. One right behind me. But start to look within yourself. See if there's some up-leveling that you can do with your very own life. And once you start doing that work, you'll be surprised how the outer changes. Mahalo, blessings. Happy Sunday.